Welcome to Immersive Experiences, the collision of storytelling and technology, presented by Technicolor. Please welcome your panelists, Guy Shelmerdine, Gawain Lydiard, Tim Dillon, and moderator Marcie Jastrow.
Hi everyone, how you doing? I'm Marcie Jastrow from Technicolor. Welcome.
Hey guys, this is Tim Dillon, executive producer, MPC VR.
Hi Tim. This is Guy here, Shelmerdine, founder of Dark Corner.
Hi, I'm Gawain Lydiard. I'm with the Mule. I'm a VFX supervisor working primarily on VR projects.
So how many people here have created or written or has done anything with VR? Wow.
We're
Awesome.
in trouble.
Wow. Okay, so I gotta keep it real, huh? So I am very fortunate to be moderating this panel for a couple of reasons, but especially because Guy's on it. I was first exposed to Catatonic, and that's really what made me want to dive deeply into VR. Catatonic really showed me what good VR could be or what great storytelling could be. So it's really nice to be able to share this with you, Guy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's very nice of you.
We're also very fortunate that both Tim and Gawain have worked on not only Catatonic, but on Guy's upcoming VR experience called the Mule. So what we're gonna do, which is a little different than what the outline is we're gonna actually talk about and take you through both of those experiences and how Guy started with the story and then how it went through post-production, okay? So why don't we start with Catatonic? Guy, why don't you tell us how you came up with that crazy little experience?
So about 2 years ago, I was challenged to make a piece, a horror piece in virtual reality, which I found it to be quite an opportunity because I'd always been interested in 360 cinema and VR, even down when I was back at college 20 plus years ago when I was young. I was very interested in immersing an audience in 360 degrees, and I actually came up with this whole concept for my degree and my thesis called the global cinema, and it was not unlike the ball outside in the auditorium in terms of being fully within a round space with projections projecting images all the way around. So 20 years go by, I become a commercial filmmaker, a music video filmmaker, short film filmmaker, and VR suddenly starts to sort of be on people's minds, and obviously with Oculus's technology, it suddenly got very real. So I had this opportunity to make a horror piece, and making anything live action in VR is incredibly tricky because you got lots of cameras, and as a lot of people here know, you have to stitch all the images together, and there was a lot of constraints to how to make something. So basically I kind of took on board all those constraints, kind of put myself in that tight box of which the medium kind of pushed me into, and I had this fucking crazy nightmare of being in a mental hospital, and it really freaked me out. And I thought, well, the only way to kind of explore that and kind of as a kind of therapy would be to actually make it for real. So I came up with this idea called Catatonic, and the idea was to go from A to B and be this journey through a mental hospital. And because the great thing about VR is that you really can put your feet in the protagonist or antagonist's shoes, and that's great, but you can't really walk like a normal human being because that will make you throw up, and no one wants to throw up unless you're bulimic. I thought, well, the only way to kind of go from A to B would be on a smooth move. So and then it just became obvious to kind of shoot the whole thing from the perspective of being on a wheelchair. So that's what we did. And we made this film about 2 years ago. And I was lucky enough to have the support of MPC, who came on board and helped me do the post-production, and Tim spearheaded that. And, if I'm going on too much, tell me to shut up. But anyway, so we made that, and I toured it around last year. And if you're actually out in the hall, you'll see that at the Technicolor booth and the MPC booth, there is a wheelchair and a nurse, and you can actually experience the film for real in the wheelchair. So we made these custom wheelchairs that vibrate at the right moment in the story, so that it kind of gives you the sensation, the added sensation of actually being in the film. And you can actually go to see it. And the nurse actually that was in the film is actually out there because I hired her today to do it. She's never even seen the film. She didn't know what we were doing when we were making the film. And then so we put a headset on her, and she's seen the film. In fact, we've got a picture of her. We have a picture of her from this morning watching herself in the film, sitting in the wheelchair with a poster of herself next to her, which is pretty awesome. But anyway, so we made that film. I toured it around last year, and I'd never been that interested in horror. I mean, I'm intrigued by horror and dark things. That's kind of part of my nature, but I'm not like a huge horror buff. But I toured that film around last year, and I kind of met this fanatical audience that just love film like no other fans in my mind. Like, the way I might love Kubrick, most people love like kind of average horror. It's insane. So it's like, I kind of met this audience. They were fucking awesome and normal, not like weird, like with tattoos and earrings and things. So I kind of made friends with people, and I've now gone on to launch my own company called Dark Corner, which is, sorry, there's someone?
Why don't we hold on Dark Corner for a second? Because we're going to show you a little.
I just drank a whole Coke, and that's why all that came out.
Take a breath. We're going to now move to Tim. So Tim,
Awesome.
what was like? What happened? Like, how did you feel when all of a sudden Guy calls you and says, "Hey, I've got this crazy idea. I need help. I don't really know what I'm doing. It's a whole new world. Let's figure it out."
Well, that's exactly it. We didn't know what we were doing either at that point. This is 2 years ago. This is debuted in South by Southwest a year and a half ago, but obviously it takes a while to work on the production itself. And I think we'd already worked with you as MPC on comedy pieces and other films, so it wasn't really we know Guy is a horror guy, and let's do a horror piece together. It was, all right, so you shot a VR film with a custom camera rig, and you got this all done in a old hospital in Pasadena. Like, let's look at this thing. I think you showed me the rough cut of the entire sequence, and said, okay, now we just need to make this perfect. That was your brief.
That's it.
Yeah. So there's a lot of challenges. It was actually a really good piece for us to see a live action VR piece that had moving cameras, turning around corners. It had some experimental cutting that Guy was playing with, and it had a lot of movement in there. So we were able to spend a good 2-3 weeks just R&Ding and seeing what actually was problematic with the piece and going back and forth on it.
How long did the process take?
We were probably racing against the clock for South by Southwest because it was really important to be there with it, and we were lucky to go down with Guy and launch it there, which was really great. There's lots of side stories about being in Austin, wheeling people around and
alcohol.
Yeah. There's actually a good, not to go off tangent, but there's actually a good reactions video on YouTube, which Guy cut together of everyone in Austin on the street reacting to Catatonic for the first time 2 years ago. But yeah, in terms of process, a couple of months and a lot of intensive work, and didn't have a lot of the tools that we have now. So there was no Cara VR, there was no Foundry, Nuke support, there was no tracking. I mean, some of these tools we're still, as people in this room know, still figuring out now, but there certainly wasn't then. And so there was an element of invention internally to actually be able to stitch, obviously, but also paint, remove shadows, create effects, and work with design and small amounts of CG.
So I'm sort of interested in the editorial process and how that worked. There's a lot of people out there who say that you really can't cut in 360, or it's not the normal editorial process that you would do in a normal story. So can you kind of talk about that and walk us through what that process looked like?
Yeah, well, I feel bad because I did more talking, but I'll just say a quick few things, then Gawain will step in. But yeah, so when we made Catatonic, that wasn't possible to actually watch what you were doing in a headset without exporting and doing a long render. So it was quite a laborious process. Every time I wanted to change one edit, it would mean like 2 hours or 3 hours wait to kind of change it. And also my editor was in New York at the time and I was in LA, so it was a real pain in the ass. But now, with my new film, it's much easier. You can actually, use Premiere, put a headset on, and actually watch things as they happen, and that's so much easier and it gives you way more flexibility, obviously.
So let's fast forward to Mule. And I got to see it yesterday, and it's crazy good, really exciting. Why don't we walk through the process of how you got there, and then what the Mule contributed, and Gawain can kind of step in and tell us what that workflow looked like.
Yeah, so after making Catatonic, I wanted to do something different. I wanted to explore narrative further within, short form, VR medium. So I kind of backed the story into sort of a technique, and I wanted to take the audience from A to B, but without necessarily moving. So there's a lot more edits in it than, say, Catatonic. Again, like Catatonic, you're in the body of the protagonist, but there was a lot of challenges in terms of, how we went about putting the footage together. Again, doing a POV, when you're doing a POV, you have, there's a lot of constraints because you have a lot of things really close up to camera and you have a lot of things further away from camera, and you kind of want everything sharp. So that's where the lovely Gawain stepped in.
Thank you. From our technical point of view, when we started talking about Mule, which is really interesting because it's so intimate and personal compared to a lot of VR that is out there, that it's this intensely personal and close-up project, which is then, as you were saying, it's really the scare factor of how are you going to piece this together. You're still using multiple cameras, you're still trying to fit that footage together, and as you get closer and you have these layers of depth, it becomes more of a technical issue. But having known and worked with Guy for a long time, and then seen how Catatonic came together, there was that trust factor of you sent tests over and we understood how this was going to be shot, and so we could prepare a pipeline for that. And really taking like a methodical approach to the shoot and having that dialogue prior to shooting is what allows those projects to happen. And by having that technical understanding of how we're going to work with that footage as it comes in, allows us to not be so scared of those decisions that a lot of people say, you can't come within 6 foot of our camera, or you can't come this close or cross these seams. But if we have that open dialogue early on between how we're going to work with that footage and the creative, then we can get over that and then break down a lot of those issues and let you be much freer with the creative.
So what was the difference in timing between how long it took to do Catatonic and how long it took to do Mule?
I would say probably about the same amount of time. We had a little bit more flexibility with Mule because I didn't have the deadline that I had was, I did initially have a very short deadline, but there was no way anyone was ever going to make that, so we extended that. But probably in terms of post, it was probably about the same amount of time. Several months, like 4 months, 5 months, something like that.
Okay. Gawain, let's talk a little bit about production, and let's talk a little bit about cameras. So you want to put up the camera slide, please? So there's quite a few cameras out there, isn't there? Can we talk a little bit about how do you make choices in cameras when you're deciding what you're shooting? How do you know? What can you do? What can you not do?
I mean, that's a good point of difference on the two projects, right? Because Catatonic was when you were working with Verse and working with the Verse rig.
Correct.
right? And you then created a rig for Mule, which is now being used by others.
Yeah, I think with Catatonic we used 8 GoPros, which is sort of a standard. That was like the sort of standard 2 years ago, or there wasn't really even a standard 2 years ago. Like it has been the standard to use GoPros, shooting 8 cameras to get the stereo. But you know, I've sort of grown to think that it's better off. You're better off having mono really good than stereo. Even you know, even stereo at 90% is not as good as mono if you can get mono really, really perfect. So for my latest film, we created a rig with radiant images. They're actually on the floor too, and the camera rig, which is ironically is called Dark Corner, is you can actually see it out there and rent it if you want.
Yeah, that camera rig that you're using there, I think, is a great example of how you think about what you want to do creatively, and then think about the camera rig that you want to use for that. That there's this huge array of camera choices to be had, and none of them are the all singing, all dancing solution at this point. They all have their strengths and weaknesses, and it's really that early conversation of what do you want to artistically get out of this project, what is important to you, what are you trying to show, is it the monoscopic flavor, is it stereoscopic, why is that important, is it really integral? And then let's think about what camera solution it is. And it wouldn't surprise me that on a more complex VR shoot that you really go through multiple camera rigs. You do use different camera rigs for different scenes. And then we can really talk and discuss with that person about how we tie that footage together. That's obviously a slightly scary prospect for some productions. You wouldn't do that on a traditional shoot. You wouldn't take out an Alexa and a Red and expect to seamlessly put that footage together, but we know we can do that now. And you can tie that footage together. So it's all about that early collaboration of breaking down artistic and tech together.
Let's talk about headsets now. So how do you decide what choice you're going to make with your headset? Do you start at the beginning? Do you start in the middle? Do you start at the end? Do you decide that you're going to go wide with every single one? Do you talk about narrative versus interactive? Can you guys kind of expand for the group what that process looks like?
I'm sure everyone in this room is pretty savvy with headsets, I'm guessing with this crowd, but it's content specific, right? We're talking about a live action piece here, we're talking about a mono live action piece, talking about getting the furthest reach we can, but it's really good for us to see, let's say PlayStation's going to launch in October, what does the PlayStation video section of the platform look like? You know, getting cross-platform is a really interesting moment, especially for films like yours, Guy, where you want to be able to getting out to as many people as possible, you know. But I would say launches for October, November, PlayStation's huge. Google Daydream got a big eye on that in terms of the mobile space, but the continued push of Rift and Vive and Gear, of course. But I think companies like us, as Technicolor and as MPC and the Mill, we're getting called by everybody and saying, well, how do we do everything all the time? You know, how do we get onto absolutely every headset, every single place? And also beyond that, how do we market this? How do we lift things? How do we version things? It's really important that we get a trailer out in the right way, and how are we doing that? And by the way, it can't all cost $10 million, you know, so we're in that kind of decision-making expertise position, which is great for us because we get to learn a lot about all of this.
I think your point about cross-platform is a really key one. That it's something that we are always trying to educate people about. That if you make something for the HTC Vive and it's a sort of room installation, and a lot of people are turned off by that because they're like, well, then it's not going to distribute widely. And we're obviously working all together to make that sort of bridge that then you can distill that experience into a 360 video. You can distribute that in many other ways. And in the same way that Guy uses installations when he comes to events, it doesn't mean that you can only experience it in that event. It's just it's its best format, and then we continue to distribute it in other ways. So there's a lot of cross-pollination there. And how we internally design the media, I think, is really interesting for that. That it's the same way that we treat traditional media, in terms of we have the ultra-high headsets in the office, and assume that if we build it for that really high-end headset, that it distributes well downstream. Otherwise, you're sort of chasing your tail of the Samsung phones have a particular color space to the screen, but as with traditional media, we spec it to like a Rec 709 color space. We understand that on our really high specification monitors, and that's sort of the benchmark of what we'll distribute downstream.
So just curious, what is besides your projects, Guy, what do you see out there in VR that has been really interesting and intriguing and different, and that you think will help push the medium forward? Is there anything special that you've seen lately?
Shall I take that first? All right. I mean, there is a ton of stuff, obviously, and then there's a lot of user-generated content, there's a lot of tentpole projects, but I personally navigate to, or gravitate rather, towards animated pieces. So the piece Pearl, the Google ATAP Spotlight Stories rather have been working on, I think is amazing. It's we were talking about this earlier. You can see it in a real-time headset, so Rift or Vive. I don't believe it's truly released, but you can go right now to a 360, go to YouTube and Google Pearl, and it's a really great story of a father-daughter story within a car. It feels like the kind of short film that we'd all see Pixar make or a similar studio. And people like Penrose, I'm sure you guys are familiar with, making things like Illuminate and Rose and I gravitate towards those pieces. I guess they have a polish to them, you know?
Yeah, I agree. I think the animation stuff. I mean, to be honest, it's like, you know, because I'm caught in, you know, I'm doing sort of live action, but I'm very interested in exploring interactive as well. But, you know, when I see certain interactive stuff, I kind of get frustrated because, you know, we're all kind of so used to playing really high resolution video games, and then when you put a headset on and play something that's a little rawer and feels rudimentary in terms of the graphics, it for me is a bit frustrating. And you know, I'm struggling a little bit with the interactive stuff. Like I haven't really seen anything that's really blown my mind yet in terms of the interactivity. And then in terms of the live action, you know, I think, you know, there's been projects that have been quite ambitious, but then I get frustrated because the quality isn't quite, you know, isn't there. And so really, I mean, I kind of feel like nothing great has been done yet, nothing amazing. You know, it will come, but we're you know, we're all trying to explore to find and create something good. And you know, well, actually, we want to create something amazing, and right now we're doing good, but it's not fucking amazing.
But don't you think the story will drive that? And as people get on board and start really experimenting with the way you tell the story in VR, and people start learning, the images will kind of go away in the sense of if you're grabbed by the story, then you're immersed in it and you love that story.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I think what I say to anyone that's interested in doing VR, and obviously a lot of people here have either created something or are wanting to, you know, it's just like you just got to do it. You got to kind of try it and see what works, and you just learn, and then, you know, your next project will be better from the last, and there'll be more story. Like every time I do a project, I want to add more story and try new things to see whether, you know, a certain technique might work or might help, you know, articulate what you want in terms of story. But you know, everything, it's such an amazing, fun learning experience right now.
Wayne, what do you think?
I would certainly echo the point about Pearl. I'm really a fan of that project, and having worked with that Spotlight Stories crew on the Help project that we did with them, knowing that their whole point of view is really this creative aspect and this creative projects that drive a vast amount of tech. I think their heads are in the right place, and they're making fantastic stuff. And the other one, which is going to sound a little self-indulgent, is the Mule project that we've done with Guy, which everyone will understand why I picked that when you see it, because it's that next step in, let's really push a narrative and make it deep and rich within VR.
Fourth row from the front, falling asleep. Huh? Look at
Wow.
Hello,
no, in front of you.
Jens. Wake that guy up.
Morning.
Great. So you know what I think we're going to do now is, so Guy has a really interesting future happening. He is coming up with his own company, Dark Corner, and we have a little reel that we want to show, which will show some scenes from Mule as well as Catatonic.
Here we are.
Hello there.
So, Guy, why don't you tell us about Dark Corners?
Yeah, Dark Corner. So, basically, Dark Corner is a studio, and we're developing and producing dark, provocative content, which we're going to plan to distribute across all platforms coming September. We're launching at Fantastic Fest, which is the most awesome genre festival in Austin, in Texas. We'll be premiering Mule, which is my next film there. And the whole VR component of that festival is going to be called Dark Corner. And yeah, we're super excited to be launching in September.
Great. Okay, so let's talk about the future. What do you guys see for the future, and where do you see it going in the way of post-production and images and story? And I just think it's going to keep getting better. Are you seeing that the tools are actually coming out, that the manufacturers, the hardware manufacturers, software manufacturers, everybody's kind of rallying around getting the content out there?
All of that good stuff. Yeah, it's true. I mean, I'll take the hard question, the future. We're seeing that evolution of everything. We're seeing evolution of camera rigs, which we've talked about, evolution of headsets. Everyone's talking about volumetric shooting, light fields. These are still somewhat experimental projects. The first time you're using a piece of tech on a project, ultimately that's the first time it's been tested. So you really got to get, like you're saying, 3 or 4 projects in with different creatives trying things before then it's like, oh, well, this works, that doesn't work. So I still see a year ahead of testing, R&D with new technology, but where we're at right now with 360 and VR will mature in that next year. I mean, we're lucky to be working on some exciting projects which we feel are second, third generation for us in terms of creative learning and technical learning, and we want to be able to work with all the best people who have that learning. So looking forward to putting projects out, see people's reaction to them, and see what works.
Gwen?
I think one of the key factors here is just it's project-based R&D that a lot of the more tech companies have been associated with and have got the platform off the ground. Now there needs to be that slight shift into real project-based R&D. We need to go out and do projects, and by pushing through and being brave about it, being like, this is the creative brief, let's not bend it to the will of the technology, let's just do what that creative brief is and make that happen. That will force the technology to catch up to what we want to do creatively. And I think we're very capable of doing that. I urge people not to be scared of taking on those projects and pushing them through, taking that forceful approach. And I think that will help us see which of those camera solutions, which of those headsets that are coming down the pipe, that will show us which of those will win out, rather than artificially trying to predict and trying to pluck things out of thin air.
Guy, you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we're certainly, Dark Corner, we're working towards, obviously interactive projects. There's certain things, I think every project that we do, we're trying to, have that sort of wow kind of VR moment where, we're trying something or doing something that hasn't been done before, so that we can stay innovative and, try new things and, be at the forefront of the technology. So there's a lot of exciting things that we're planning that some I can't talk about, but that really will kind of take this, medium to a whole different level, and we're super excited about that.
That's great.
I was just going to add, I was just sitting here listening to you guys, just thinking about the marketplace the way it is, right? So we have headsets right now, and we have very few people with headsets. I mean, everyone in this room probably owns a couple of different headsets, probably. But actually, there's this unique time where it's actually better to go to an event like this or go to an actual location. And therefore, that means there's sort of this rise of kind of event-based theme park style ideas that normally would be financially restrictive. Everyone would be like, I'm not going to make that crazy theme park idea you want to do because we could just put this out on the headset. Whereas actually for the next year or maybe even 2, we're still in this kind of unique place where you could actually do some pretty special things in a location before everyone in the world has a headset, and then obviously we migrate into AR, VR mix, and it becomes a more functional conversation as well as entertainment. But I think that's interesting. I'm kind of really curious to see in the next 12 months plus who's going to get to do the really interesting big event pieces.
I'm hoping that's us. any one of us. So basically, the next thing I'd like to do is just really kind of talk about AR and where you see that's going and what you see is on the horizon. I've done a couple of demos which I thought were pretty interesting, and where you see how virtual reality will bridge into AR, and do the two kind of go together? Where does mixed reality come in the middle of it? Is that the middle of it? Let's talk a little bit about that.
I'm happy to jump in there. It's really a sliding spectrum for me. There isn't necessarily these clear divisions that people are putting up between this is VR, this is AR, this is sort of mixed reality. It's like that sliding spectrum of the full immersive headset, but then as soon as you start to introduce some elements of your room and your space, is that becoming mixed reality? You know, people debating whether, you know, Pokemon and stuff like that is that some kind of AR? I don't see any reason. I think it just doesn't help us to put up rigid barriers between what is and what isn't. I think just letting it flow naturally and finding out what people gravitate towards, what people find those natural aspects of stuff that they like, and then having those sneak peeks into what those real powerhouses of those areas like Magic Leap are doing. You can definitely see that it's coming. Like, there is a reality of this is coming. So naysaying it or being too cautious of it, I think it's a wave that's coming, and it will be an interesting uptake of all the media that we're making now that is more VR specific. I think will flow really well into that, and will teach us a lot of lessons of how to deal with those more complex settings and how to work in that space.
Guy, you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's AR is blowing my mind. That it's so fun to play around with that technology, and we have a couple of things brewing with that. A couple of stories that we want to tell, yeah, it's got an amazing opportunity, and I think we should all be thinking about how we can, move into that field as well.
Even just wear the HoloLens and look really sexy in the really big helmet of a headset.
Tim, you always look sexy.
Thank you. Not in a HoloLens. The HoloLens is great. I'm not being rude about the HoloLens, but it's
You're hot.
Thanks. It's a form factor. I'm going to dodge this. It's a form factor problem, though, right? In terms of a Daft Punk style helmet right now, which is kind of where we're at, versus we all want it to be Ray-Bans. We all want Apple to come out with an amazing pair of glasses that we can put a pack in our pocket and be able to actually have AR with us all the time. Even still, I'm kind of curious. It's a different experience than being in an enclosed, intimate space. So for me, I think a lot about distractions and limiting distractions. Someone hands you a Gear VR in a room. Is there 10 people out on the floor around you? And does that change the experience you're having? There's some interesting ideas of theatricality and what's going on in the real world, what's going on with you in the headset, how do those two things mix together? I think we're more likely to see, well, I guess I'm coming back to what I'm saying about events, more likely to see some theatrical crossover in these real world events with AR as well, which will be great to see.
Great. Okay, so now we are going to open up the floor for questions, because I'm sure you guys have some questions that you may want to ask. They're going to go ahead and grab one of the microphones. But if anybody has a question, I'd raise their hands now.
Hi. Regarding the solutions with stitching and things along those lines, as cameras move, whether it's like a theta-like thing or something like that, that it does it automatically. Would you rather that happen, or would you rather have the ability to go in there and affect those things themselves? In other words, is part of the process now that says, no, I like to put a stitch in it or do our own work because we do this, that, or the other, or would you be really interested in knowing that being solved and just getting the stitched image given to you?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's a lot of talk around that. All the cameras are coming at it in a different way, but optical flow as a technique gets us there. The Google Jump rig has optical flow, the new Facebook rig has optical flow, so does the Ozo. Then you get artifacts, and then you're back in painting out artifacts territory. So yeah, if you can eliminate all the artifacts, then of course, yeah, why would we want to spend our time stitching things? There may be some cases for CG and some other kind of magic. Here you go. where there's a specific reason to go to a lens. Felix and Paul's technique of going wedge by wedge, slice by slice, and creating the highest quality picture they can. That's happening because they want to create a high quality picture than exists. So it's a question of stitching, but it's also a question of is the picture good enough? Is the lensing good enough? Would you agree with it?
Yeah, I just want to add the point of, to me, one of the issues with that is that they're too separate. That the manual stitch is overly manual, and whilst we're seeing incremental sort of progress in adding some of that intelligent stitching to the manual process, it's still a very manual process. And then the automated stitch sits on the far other side, and it's overly automated, and you can't get in there, and you can't, where it's making mistakes, you can't help it along in the process. So it's these two separate systems, and you kind of make your bet at the start, and then you're stuck with it. It's not quite that clean cut, but it's somewhat in that direction. And so I'm really hoping that there's more of a blend, that as people practically use these technologies, as we do on a very day-to-day basis, that they see that don't get overly focused into one route or the other. Let's try and blend them so that we benefit from the strength of both, that we don't totally rely on the automated stitch, but then when we move out of the automated stitch, it doesn't suddenly become a completely manual process.
You guys touched a little bit on you're looking out for Google Daydream, and it seems like a pretty good platform to spread pretty broadly. Are you guys thinking about your app and its relationship to your stories?
What a good question, Guy.
I think presently definitely looking into how a film can play on an app, but not in terms of the interactivity and how that might work. Not quite thinking about that yet. That's sort of down the road, I think, for me.
We've built some apps for individual projects and have the thoughts of, okay, do we play with branching narratives? Do we allow for other ways for the Unity-based apps we're creating to play with the video content that we have? Can you embed real-time CG objects in Unity into a stereo 360 video so no one notices that you've done that? But it does come back to story. It's like, why do it? Does it matter? And Daydream will bring those questions, I think, because it's a Unity-based, or it's Unity and Unreal-based real-time mobile platform, but there's a video element to that too.
Yeah, I mean, just to give you an example, in the film that Mule that the mill are just finishing now for me, there is a branching narrative in it, but we decided to not have it branching right now, and we're just going to have two versions of the film, so you get to choose which version, just because it just, in terms of ease of use, it just is not quite there yet, but it will be, and then we'll be able to have it be branching. But right now, in how the technology works, it would just be too distracting, and it would ruin the pace of the film to branch.
It's an interesting point in terms of, to get those benefits now, you certainly have to write your own app, but then are we going to see a point where there is a more universal platform that is flexible enough to allow for that? I think that's the interesting upside of that question.
Hello. Two questions. One is if you had a wish list, like a top 3 wish list, what would that be? And could you speak to sound and how that, how the things that you're dealing with in terms of sound, and to localize that better in your experiences?
When you say a wish list, is that an open-ended wish list, or is it a technology-based wish list?
Speedboat.
Pertaining to the stuff that we're dealing with at the moment, the VR aspect, a more understandable platform would be high on that, of like, this is the goal platform for now, and we know we can set that bar, and then for lesser deliverables we can degrade from there. I think that would help everyone within the group, so that we're not all trying to push different aspects. We can sort of homogenize our efforts and push for the same thing. We need a ton more power in general, so it's the same problem that we've grappled with for ages, of every time a new bit of tech or a new way of viewing stuff comes along, we need more computing power, more storage, more ways to get this through that allow us to work faster. And then more directorial tools, more on-set tools would be my number one wish, I think, above everything else, that we can get back to shooting stuff on set the way that we're used to, as opposed to dancing around these things.
I want to hear Guy's top 3 wish list too.
My wish is for you two to have whatever you want. And then, yeah, I guess money to make content. That's my wish.
That's actually not a bad point, right? Because we're all in this VR ecosystem, and actually we are seeing, because we're a VR studio, content creating studio, and we're happy to be there. We're seeing a lot of really great ideas, and I'm not sure whether all of them are going to get made because of financing and that just the amount of people, like everyone sitting here, that's interested in this space. So yeah, I guess actually I'll steal that and say the top 3 things would be 3 amazing projects we can get funded and made, rather than having them see they're just sitting on paper and not happening.
I think my first one would be fear, and to kind of take away the fear from what VR really means or what AR means. I would like to see that people go out there and they start shooting and they start experimenting and they start seeing, how the story develops and what can happen. I think that that's how we're going to commercialize the content. That's how we're going to get it out there. That's how we're going to see really good stories and have really interesting experiences. Both big experiences, little experiences, narrative, interactive. But I just wish everybody would, kind of take the fear out of it and just jump in.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of sound, yeah, I mean, it's definitely, whenever you're filming or shooting anything, you're thinking about sound and you're listening, obviously dialogue and what's happening in terms of ambience around and how sound can actually, tell story as much as visuals. It's very important. I've been fortunate enough to work with a company called Q Department in New York, and they have an amazing piece of software called Mac One, which is basically their amazing way of providing sound to the audience. And I can't really speak much more than that about it, but it's an amazing technology what they're doing.
I mean, they are. Sound is one of the areas that's having the best shot at standardization in VR right now. They are able to look at what's going on with YouTube and playback and start to get towards formats, whereas visually we're in Unreal Engine. There's still a lot of other engines. There's not that much standardization yet. So actually the sound guys are doing us all a favor in terms of being able to standardize.
Having spoken with Scott a huge amount, I don't want to paraphrase him too much, but he made really interesting points that opened up my eyes to the way that he's approaching it, because he's approaching it from his historical background of having designed for so many feature films, so many games, that again, like a lot of the areas around VR, we're getting overly focused on the tech. That people are putting out an ambisonic mic and they're saying, there, now we have our 360 sound. And it just sounds kind of terrible. It's not what we're doing. We've never done that on set. We always mic people up. We always have boom mics in. And those, so instantly jumping to that more sophisticated understanding of sound and then saying artistically, what do we want to get out of this? Again, I don't want to paraphrase what Scott says incorrectly, but when he talks about it, he wants to, what are you trying to get out of this? When the jet flies overhead, you really want to hear that swooping sound that they put into a cinema soundscape, which is an overemphasized stereoscopic effect of the sound coming in. And I like that approach. I like that really artistic approach that you can bring in, that once you understand the tech of it, let's get past it just sounding like a real room. Let's get into something where you're actually driving the story with the sound.
And haptics works. I mean, I think we'd all agree, Catatonic was the first time that I worked with haptics on a project. It was Guy's suggestion to have a butt kicker inside the wheelchair.
Actually, I have to give credit to somebody else on that.
Okay.
I took their idea and gave it to you. Just to be, honest.
That's cool. It was the first time I'd worked with haptics, though, and it does add. There's a scene in Catatonic. There's a moment in Catatonic where you're bounced down some stairs, and the butt kicker is literally bouncing the chair around, and it adds a lot. But then, if you look at we worked on a project called The Martian with a whole bunch of other people, and there's D-Box chair integration with that project, and there's some really subtle moments of leaning back and moving forward. So it can be big, it can be small. There's a ILM X Lab Tatooine Star Wars project that's just been launched, and you can use a lightsaber and the stormtrooper blasts a blaster at you, and you feel that return of that blaster with a lightsaber, which I just had to mention.
Yeah, in our, I was going to say, in the film Mule that we're doing, we're actually playing with smell and temperature as well, in terms of how we present the film.
Thank you so much. I'm a filmmaker working on many different social impact issues and foraying into VR, and working on a VR series actually about human trafficking. And I'm curious if any of you are working on any series, and how are you solving some of the creative challenges that are inherent in VR? I'm so excited to hear.
That's great that you're working on something good for the world. That's good. Versus dark things. Yeah, I think, I think, the first challenge for me in terms of episodic is like, holy shit, that means we've got to do 8 times the amount of work, I would say that, the challenge, I think, which actually a good thing, because it means you have to be more efficient in terms of how you tell story, is that you can't, like if I knocked on either the Mill or NPC's door and say, hey, I've got this hour-long show about whatever, I mean, they would just tell me to, they would usher me out of the building, because I think, it's just like so much work. I can't, a 5-minute film, like literally me asking for a fine stitch of a 5-minute film is the equivalent of me coming to them and saying, hey, I have this concept where I want to build fully CG gorillas. Can you help me? Like it's that kind of level of work that, I mean, you can stitch badly, or you can stitch well, and even the best, you need the stitch to be the best quality so that there's no flaws and it just looks perfect. And unfortunately, it's not glorious work. It's just hard graft and it to make something look perfect. So when you're talking about an episodic piece, that's the first thing that occurs to me. That's the first challenge in my mind. I mean, obviously, how you keep the interest and how you structure each episode so that you have your audience coming back for more, I think is obviously important, but that's just narrative storytelling. And but I think the biggest challenge you'll have is just the quantity of what that means. And my suggestion is, and certainly what we're doing with Dark Corner is a lot of our work is episodic. Like Catatonic is the first episode of many others, but we just treated the first one like a pilot, and it's a standalone film, but there's more in the series, So maybe an approach would be to say, make one, with and do that right, and and then continue making them.
It raises a whole bunch of other questions as well about monetization, the platform in general, how to get it paid for. Is it news content as episodic? In which case, can the quality level be lower because it's more credible, or it's information? Or is it, as you say, does it need to be perfect for an hour's worth of content? In which case, do you sell that because then it's funding itself? In which case, we'll stitch it all day long for you guys.
On the interactive VR side, we're always concerned about the motion sickness. But on the 360 videos, is there such problems, or how do you guys mitigate the problems?
I'd start by saying that I think our interest is also in the game engine based and light field based. So when we talk about narrative, it's not that we're talking specifically about 360 video. We're talking about all forms of it, and I think we're all working in that space of HTC Vive experiences and full room based and game. And then to address that point of how do you get around that, I think it's by coming up with creative solutions and being diligent. If you feel nauseous when you're watching it, then you've done something wrong, and you need to go back and readdress how you make that work. The help piece that we did has this one huge, long, flowing camera move, and Justin Lin, the director of that, always talked about it as being this fluid master. And very few people feel uncomfortable with that. Like it's a really gracefully executed, very soft moving camera move, and consequently it works. So I think if you invest in the understanding of how you're moving people around, then we should be able to get past that. I don't see it as like a massive barring issue.
I mean, in Catatonic, which is 2 years old, so we were having conversations about comfort, but also it's like, well, it's a horror piece and you're strapped into a chair in a hospital, so maybe it's kind of fine if you aren't 100% comfortable in this place, you know? So there's an element of like, is it meant to be a peaceful experience? Is it meant to be jarring? I'm sure you're aware of like using that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want anyone to feel nauseous. I want you to feel, you want to add intensity and stuff, but I think, in terms of being nauseous, no, the goal is for people to come out going, oh, that was great, I don't feel sick at all. It happens that, say, 1 in 20 people that see Catatonic might feel a little nauseous, but they are also susceptible to car sickness or whatever else, so c'est la vie.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.